Okay, it is terribly out of focus. You know what? This is a live stream and it's going to be out of focus. That just shows you how that's my concentration level. It splits between being highly focused and somewhat out of focus. Hey, everybody. So first, I just want to say hello to everyone who's joining us. Let us know where you're from. We have a few people already saying hello. We have Naresh back from New Jersey. Greg's saying hello from the UK. We have Purple from Kentucky, Ralph from Brooklyn. Who else am I seeing here? Let me know where you're coming from in the chat. And if your name listed here is not what your actual name is, forgive me if I forget your name, like G Student 00. I won't remember your name, so forgive me. Tell me your name and I'll try to remember. Deborah's here, Ditmas Park area. Lucas from the Netherlands. Hello, Lucas. So as folks are rolling in, I just want to say thank you so much for coming. Hello from NYC and Rochester. Avery and Drew, welcome. We're very excited. Oh, wow, we have a couple Rochester folks. Hopefully you folks know each other and can connect. If not, maybe make a connection. Singapore, lovely. Hi, Jun. So welcome, folks. Welcome, everyone. This is an exciting day. This is our third day of this live stream. We started on Monday. Our new schedule is going to be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern, same time as this. And we're very honored today to have a very special guest, a teacher of mine, a mentor, the person who really helped me solidify my path of teaching, guiding other people, and really helped me solidify my relationship to mindfulness and this material. When we talk about the Deep Mindfulness Collective, what we're talking about in large part is the use and application of Shinzen's tools. If I've learned one thing from Shinzen, it's that anything in our lives can be the object of meditation to bring us towards awakening. And so what we try to do here, what our goal is to use the specific objects that would be most likely to give us a fulfilling, rich, and happy life. So we focus on connection, creativity, and exploring consciousness and using those to bring meditation into every aspect of our lives. And that mission would be really impossible if it weren't for our distinguished guest who's here with us today, Shinzen Young. For those of you who don't know, Shinzen Young is, I don't know if he would say this, but I would definitely say it, by all accounts, a meditation master. He has studied monastically in all of the three major Buddhist traditions. He was a scholar before he was a experiential contemplative, someone actually doing the practices. And he's created over time a language to talk about the deep experiences of mindfulness that really didn't exist before that. And the importance of that is that without a language that we can all use, we could never really move towards a universal conversation around awakening or any of these contemplative processes. And so it's starting to be absorbed by science, and science is starting to recognize how important that is. Of course, science is always very tuned into how important language is, but particularly around contemplative practice. So Shinzen is joining us here from California. Oh, hello from Monterey. Welcome. The two people from Rochester are married. Well, that is a coincidence, and we appreciate you guys getting married just so it makes more sense on the live stream. That's very sweet of you. Before we begin, we're going to have Shinzen out here in just 1 minute. Some of you already know that this plant is actually misnamed right now, and I'm so sorry because I didn't go back to the old live stream and find out who the last person was who gave what's called a super chat. It's a kind of donation you can give in the chat. So just so folks know, in the chat box, there's a little $sign. You can give a donation, and what that does is it supports the stream. In this case, the support will be going directly to Shinzen. So anything you give will be given directly to Shinzen to do with what he pleases, to support himself or any project or thing that he's working on. So the first person who puts a super chat in the chat gets a high five from me, and the last person who puts a super chat in gets the plant named after them. So I want to give a special shout out, and if someone knows who the last super chatter was yesterday, I apologize. We haven't switched the name yet, but Ralph gave 2 super chats in the 2 days in a row, so we wanted to honor him, and we want to make sure that our last guest gets a super chat as well. So if you want to at any time, please feel free to do that. Shinzen is here. Avery, that is very kind. Okay, here you go. Here's your high five from me. Whoosh, whoosh. Thank you very much. Okay, lovely. So let's see. We're going to bring in our very good friend here, Shinzen, which is very exciting. And yeah, okay. So let's see what we have here. Let's bring us up some Shinzen. Shinzen, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
I hear you beautifully. How are you?
Okay, I'm great.
Now
So
let's
it's working.
let's check if it's working. I'm going to check the chat. Hey, everyone in the chat, will you tell me if you can hear my voice and you can hear Shinzen's voice?
So this is Shinzen's voice.
There's a little delay. Oh, that's Avery sent another one. Yes, says, okay, you can hear both. It sounds like yes. See, very good. Okay, yes, perfect. Yes, yes, yes. Okay, thank you, everyone. This is a little bit of a complex setup, so we wanted to see that. So, Shinzen's going to give us a little bit of a conversation. Shinzen and I were talking about how time is a factor in meditation, how the experience of time is relevant in relationship to our sensory experience. And this came up for me in particular in my practice through reading Shinzen's material. Actually, when I was younger, I would think about time a lot and the experience of time. And when I went to school for sculpture, time was a very big topic because space and time are very linked in terms of sculpture, and people really struggled how to represent time or how to create an experience where people recognize time. And in Shinzen's map of awakening, he has an area where time starts bending back on itself. And for a long time, I didn't know what that was talking about. And through Shinzen's guidance, etc., I began to get a greater degree of a glimpse and having experiences where time seems like it stops, or periods where time seems like it's distorting or slowing down, or these kind of things. It made me very interested in this, and I realized I haven't heard a conversation on this. So, Shinzen, tell us a little bit about that and any thoughts you have on that topic before we begin to meditate.
Sure. First, just a minor correction.
Oh, please.
I'm actually broadcasting from Tucson, Arizona, not
Oh, okay.
California.
Oh, see, there you go.
Uh, yeah, we're setting up a neuroscience lab here at the University of Arizona to study possible techno enhancement for mindfulness practice. So I'm cleaning walls and cleaning out old files. They gave us a lab space, but we have to physically set things up. So I'm sort of having this adventure of setting up my first lab. It's a little bit like the first time you set up a live-in relationship with, a partner.
Sure.
That whole adventure of we're going to decorate the space, we're going to put our mark on it. So we call it SEMA Lab, Sonication Enhanced Mindful Awareness Lab
Awesome.
at the University of Arizona Department of Psychology. So anyway, yeah, it's pretty cool. It's like a dream come true for me. I actually have my own lab.
That's lovely. Awesome.
So yeah, in Tucson, and it's warm as opposed to where I usually live in Vermont, where it is the same as what you're experiencing, only worse. Anyway, yeah, just wanted to mention that. So I think the very first thing that comes to my mind, if we start to talk about time, is that we want to make some distinctions from the get-go. Distinctions that if we don't make, will lead to endless confusion. So, first of all, before I get into making those distinctions, I'd like to mention something that's pretty obvious to most people who have a modern education, which is that time and space are very linked notions. So although you can talk about them individually, it's also important to realize their natural connection. And in fact, one of the most surprising features of Einstein's contribution to physics was the notion that there actually is not space and time as separate things in the physical world. There's something called space-time, and they're completely woven together. So that's, of course, in the physical world. So I think one thing I'd want to say is when we talk about time, when we talk about space, these are related notions.
Yeah.
And for both the notion of time and the notion of space, or the notion of them as a single thing, it's important, I think, to distinguish
I think
four
we might be losing you a little bit, Shinzen.
Can you hear me okay?
I lost your audio there for a second.
Am I back now?
Oh, yeah, it's back. Sorry.
Sorry about that.
Nope, not your fault.
So I would say whenever we use time as a word, whenever we use space as a word, or whenever we speak of the two in some sort of relationship, I would distinguish four perspectives. And it's important to understand which perspective we're talking about, because in a sense, they're very different critters. So first of all, there's time and space as these are spoken of by physical scientists, people in the natural sciences, specifically physics. They talk about time and space. So this is a perspective on time and space that is only known to people that do their homework, to understand enough math, to understand enough physics, to appreciate how the science of physics deals with time, how the science of physics deals with space. So this would be time and space from the viewpoint of physics, or physical time and space. Now, some people might call it objective, but that could be a problematic term. But let's just say time and space, as a physicist is going to speak about them. If you don't understand the underlying physics, you can't really argue about the nature of time and space from the physics point of view. You have to have a background to make an intelligent statement in that domain. So
And
that's one thing.
Shinzen, I was going to mention that I think when I started approaching this stuff, especially in sculpture and in meditation early on in my early 20s, let's say, I thought I needed to understand that perspective fully in order to have an experience of time, which is almost comical when you compare it to how time is very much part of all of our experiences.
Yeah. So I would encourage anyone, if they're interested, to learn about how physicists think about time and space, how they think about it from the viewpoint of relativity, how they think about it from the viewpoint of quantum mechanics, how you think about it from the viewpoint of classical mechanics, for that matter, well, anyway, it's fun. So that's one perspective. Here's another perspective related, but not identical at all, which is how mathematicians formulate time and space. So there are mathematical structures, there are time calculi, there are a gazillion flavors of geometry and topology that characterize different kinds of spaces. And when you get good at this stuff, at the mathematician's view of space, and by the way, I should say, from the mathematician's point of view of space, usually time is considered actually a dimension of space. So that's just a way of looking at things. So in any event, there's when you get good at geometry and topology, you come to see, you come to understand that there are dozens and dozens of mathematical structures that are spatial or temporal-spatial abstractions that each sort of flavor of topological or geometric space has its own personality. And mathematicians come to know space the way a young child comes to know the social world of being a human. You learn, oh, there's this kind of personality, there's this kind of personality, there's girls, there's boys, this kind of girl relates to this kind of boy, etc., etc. Early socialization everyone experiences. Well, I can tell you that mathematicians develop a sense of personality regarding different types of spaces, and it's fascinating. So
Wow.
that's another perspective. That's space and time as structured by trained mathematicians. I would encourage anyone to learn about that. However, you can't comment or critique or contribute to the mathematical concepts of time and space unless you have the qualifications, unless you've done the homework.
Sure.
So there are two specialized knowledges of time and space. One, as stated by someone trained in physics. Another one, as stated by someone trained in mathematics. Of course, the thing is, most people that are trained in math have some background in physics, maybe not a lot. Every physicist has an enormous training in mathematics. So there's a close relationship between formal space, the formal spaces that mathematicians formulate,
Hmm.
and the, shall we say, objective physical time space that physicists deal with. They utilize what the mathematicians come up with in order to, and then they see, does it fit so-called physical reality? So now the physicist's knowledge of space and time and the mathematician's view of space and time, if you're not in those areas of specialty, you can study them. If you study them deeply, then you have something to say about them. If you don't study them deeply, then you're not yet qualified to comment on that. However, there's two other perspectives on space and time. There and anyone can comment on them. One of those perspectives is what we would call the sensory experience of space and time. We all have the sense that there is a time, and for most people, that perception of time is rigid, extended duration that runs infinitely to the past and future. That's sort of the perception that people have of time. And the perception that people have of space is it always exists and it's extended and rigid and I'm embedded in it. These are the normal space-time experiences. So that's yet a third meaning of space and time. Space and time as experienced sensorially by human beings. Now, that actually changes over a lifetime. How you experience space and time in the first few weeks of life versus the first few months of life, first few years of life. How you sensorially experience space and time will change, evolve. If you become a successful meditator, your sensory experience of time and space will also change. So that's a third perspective. So I'm trying to advocate people having clean conversations about time and space. Am I talking about time and space from the perspective of physical science? Am I talking about the time and space from the perspective of mathematical formalism? Am I talking about time and space from the perspective of my own sensory experience? That there is a thing called time, there is a thing called space. Fourth perspective, am I making some sort of philosophical statement about the nature of time and space that is based on my own speculation or based on a belief, the way I think things should be, or would like them to be? There's what we might call the philosopher's perspective. And of course, there's two kinds of philosophers: professional philosophers who have done a lot of work in an area and are trained. And one of the things is the philosophy of time and the philosophy of space. They're trained in this. And then there's all the other philosophers. All the other philosophers is every adult human being, because we all have opinions. And we may not be trained in the complexities and subtleties the way a professional philosopher is, but we definitely have our opinions. So that's sort of people's opinions about time, either informed by careful study of philosophy, or just, hey, I'm Joe Random Public, I'm Jane Random Public, and my opinion is as good as anyone else's, and here's what I think space and time are about. Okay, so that's all the other philosophers. So I am not qualified, well, actually, I am qualified to talk about physical time and mathematical time. I would not say I'm qualified to talk about, from a professional philosophy point of view, about time. But my biggest qualification to speak about time is about the sensory experience of time and space. So I think everyone is clear. If you want to avoid heat and bring light to the conversation about time and space, from my perspective, first thing to keep in mind is there's what a professional scientist says, there's what a professional mathematician may say, there's what a professional philosopher may say, there's what anyone may say philosophically because they have an opinion, and then there's how we actually experience time and space. And that I can talk about from the perspective of practice.
Yeah, and I think that something that for me is helpful, a lot of the situations that we talk about that seem like they're hard to believe in meditation, or they seem like there's something wrong, or there are these big arguments, if we just put the phrase "from my perspective" or "from a perceptual perspective," it eliminates it. Like people say, "I disappear," or "I'm floating in another realm," or these things. You say, "Perceptually, I experience that I'm floating in another realm." The whole conversation just becomes very simple.
That's right, because what we meditators do is we often speak with less than full rigor. I'll talk about becoming space, okay? What the hell does that mean? Am I claiming that we're becoming what a physicist calls space? Am I claiming that we're becoming what a mathematician calls space?
Or that we weren't that in the first place.
Yeah. No, I'm claiming that there is a significant shift in my perception of time. There's a significant shift in my perception of space. I'm not making irresponsible claims that I'm a mathematician or a physicist, but I am reporting something humanly significant in my sensory, or as you said, perceptual experience of time and space. And so when you hear meditators talk about things like time stops, or space collapses to a dimensionless point, or space becomes infinite in all dimension, in all directions, and I am that boundlessness. Okay, these are all conversations about perceptual or sensory experience of space. If meditators start to claim that they can make claims about physics, mathematics, or etc., that's that's just based on the fact that they have a sensory experience. No, you can't do that. That's irresponsible. You have to be trained in those disciplines. Same is true for philosophy. So I don't make claims about philosophy. I'm not going to argue with Kant about the nature of space and time. That's for other people. But
Yeah.
I am very professionally trained as an observer of sensory experience. And I think I can, with confidence, say some things that are both true, important, and perhaps not obvious about the sensory experience of time and space. But before we delve into that, I think you were requesting that we would have some guidance.
Yeah, that'd be great. We'll do a little practice. So we want to make sure that we are sensitive and aware of other people's time. So I think what we're planning on doing is Shinzen, you'll do 15 minutes now, and then we'll chat a little bit, and then do a little closing. Is that what you wanted to do?
Well, we got into a longer discussion.
Yeah.
Let's do about 10 minutes of guidance,
Okay.
and then maybe talk a little bit about some of the changes in time that may take place as the result of practice. And
Great.
then if we have some more time, we'll do another 10 minutes of guidance or so.
Great.
And the second guidance will build on the first.
Perfect.
Shall we
And
go for that?
let's do it. And you're timing yourself.
I am timing myself.
Okay.
I have a clock in front of me.
Okay. Take it away.
So folks, we're going to do some guided practice. You can do it with, actually, just for the fun of it, let's do it with your eyes open. That's good practice for daily life. Take a moment to stretch up and settle in. And I'm going to have you monitor moment by moment when you're pulled to something external. You might be pulled to a physical sight. You might be pulled to a physical sound. You might be pulled to a physical as opposed to emotional type body sensation, sight, sound, touch, or see out, hear out, feel out. So when you're drawn to what we might describe as outer activity, sight, sound, touch, wherever the touch may be, say to yourself the word out, and just let your attention pour out expansively into the spatial volume of that sight, that sound, or that touch. So we'll call that out. And for a moment, we're going to anchor out. There'll just be one label, out, out. If you get pulled in to mental image, mental talk, or body sensation that to you in that moment seems obviously emotional in nature, if you get pulled to inner activity, ignore that and turn 180 degrees. Take your nearest exit from thought and emotion. Anchor out. Once again, for any outer activity, visual, auditory, somatic, or combination thereof, just label that out and let that happen. Okay, good. Now let's reverse the polarity. For just a moment, your eyes are still open, but defocus. Disengage from sight, sound, touch. Monitor the tug of inner activation. It's analogous. There's a visual component, mental image. There's an auditory component, mental talk. And there's a somatic component, body emotion. Anger, fear, sadness, embarrassment, impatience, disgust, interest, joy, love, gratitude, humor, smile, etc., etc. That's body emotion. So if you're pulled to the inner world of mental image, mental talk, or body emotion, we're going to label that in, and we're going to just disengage from out for a moment as best you can, and note in whenever you have a thought, an emotion, will, desire, memory, plan, fantasy, judgment, conviction, confusion. They all arise in the inner system: mental image, mental talk, body emotion. So he just used the label in. In this case, it means any one or combination of inner activations. Untangle, in. Now, just for the fun of it, let your attention go wherever it wants to go. You'll notice there are exactly 4 possibilities. You may be pulled out to an outer activation, sight, sound, touch. You may be pulled in to an inner activation, mental image, mental talk, body emotion. That's 2 possibilities. You may be pulled in both directions at once. You hear a sound, which is an outer activation, but you see a mental image, that's an inner activation. A 4th possibility is that the tug of the senses goes away. Or you're aware of something sensory, but it's restful. The body is relaxed. The eyes are defocused. The mental talk is quiet, and so forth. So there may not be activity, either because you're having a sensory restful state or because the senses themselves are no longer tugging. So you may experience relative rest or absolute rest. We'll call that rest. So now we're going to let attention go wherever it wants to go without a preference, and we're going to monitor exactly 4 possibilities. You're either pulled to outer activation, label that out, or you're pulled to inner activation, label that in, or you're pulled to both at the same time, label that both, or there's no activation, or rather you are experiencing a relative or absolute restful state, there's either, because there's no activation, so we'll call that rest. In, out, both, rest. It may be mostly just one of those four. Our job is to have no preference between the four and to make your best guess moment by moment. Am I pulled to outer activation, inner activation, bidirectional activation, or something relatively or absolutely restful? Once again, the labels are in, out, both, and rest for just a couple minutes. Okay, good. Now, you can continue to do that as a formal practice or a background practice or micro hit, or you can drop intentional practice and just listen to the conversation. And hopefully we'll have time for a few more minutes of guidance at the end. So, Janusz, I've said one of the main things I wanted to say, which was to help relieve some of the contention around discussions by pointing out that there's really four very different perspectives about time and the related notion of space. So I think you wanted me to probably say something about, well, how does the perception of time change as we practice? Or did you have some specific thing you'd like me to delve into?
Well, specifically for me, I think it's just been something that's been interesting for me to explore in my own practice. And I think it's one of those things around explaining water to a fish. I thought time was this abstract thing and it's somehow related to space in some way, but not recognizing that sensorially, every experience that I have tends to be experienced as though it were occurring. It's moving in time. Even the words I'm speaking now have this sense of, okay, they're occurring, but they're moving. There's this sort of movement happening, and that it was actually very tactile, and that tactile experience was constantly flexing and changing, and that had a lot of there was a lot of juice in there to explore, to have fun, and to to get some fun insights around perception.
Okay, so the guided practice that I just gave was designed to sensitize someone to the fact that sometimes they'll be pulled to outer activation, Sometimes they'll be pulled to inner activation. Sometimes they'll be pulled to both. And sometimes they might drop into a restful state. So that's 4 possibilities. But that can boil down to just 2 possibilities. You're either in a restful state or you're pulled to some sort of activation. And if you notice, the activations are extended in space. When you have a body sensation, it has width, depth, height. When you hear a sound, it's on the right, it's on the left, it's everywhere. When you hear your own mental talk, it's in your head, on the right or the left or both sides. Certainly the objective world of color and form that we call sight, or the material world conventionally, it has right, left, front, back, up, down. So in time, you are pulled to a space of inner activation at a given instant, or a space of outer activation at a given instant, or both at the same time. Or you are not pulled into inner and or outer activation. Therefore, you are not pulled into a space. So, in a sense, the flow of as your restful, I should say, as your restful state becomes deeper and deeper and deeper, the sense that you're tugged into space starts to go away. The restful state seems like a dimensionless point without spatial extent. That's as it matures with time. It matures into something that could be called cessation, nirota, or momentary nirvana. So your restful state evolves. And as the restful state deepens, you realize that the perception there's a world on the outside, and the perception there's a self metaphorically on the inside, that perception arises at a moment of time, lasts for a few seconds or a few minutes or maybe many minutes, and then eventually passes away. And the thing that it arises from, the absolute rest that it arises from, and the absolute rest that it returns to, that does not move forward in time. So you go from the sense that time is a rigid linear extent to the sense that time is episodic. There's arising and passing. At the arising, time and space come into sensory time and space, right? We're being very careful about what we're saying. I'm not saying about physicists, that may or may not be related. Right. Not saying about mathematicians or professional philosophers, may or may not be related. But the sensory experience of there is a next. The tug of next starts to weaken. So what happens is, in absolute rest, that sense that I have to have a next starts to go away. And so the perception of space is episodic. My sensory space is the inner and outer space of activation that arises and passes away. So both the perception of time and space change. Instead of the notion that space is always there, sensory space, the space of sight, sound, touch, image, talk, body, emotion. The sense that sensory space is always there, that goes away. The sense that sensory time as a rigid, eternal continuum, that goes away. And it's replaced. I mean, you can imagine that old way if you want, but your new way gives you another way to think about time and space, which is it's episodic. It's cyclic. There's no time and space sensorially. And then time space arise for whatever duration and extent, and then time space collapse back to absolute.
Yeah, and it's funny. I
So
realized
I and mold come and go.
I realized that the very first question I ever asked you years ago was actually, I was trying to reconcile. I realized it was a time-based question. It was, how could there be flow? I feel like I have an answer to this question now, but how could there be flow if there is only the present moment? And it was basically, kind of one of the questions a newcomer will ask, or someone new to thinking about it from this perspective. But this question about the present moment being always present, and then, or the only thing that exists, and this extension of time, I think is an interesting one. I just want to pause real quick for a programming note. So a couple things. One is that thank you so much, Anita, for your super chat. If folks don't know, super chats are donations that support the stream. In this case, it'll go to support Shinzen whatever way he wants. The last person to give a super chat gets this beautiful plant named after them. Fun, just for fun. And I want to check with folks. Do we want to go into conversation, just asking Shinzen more questions? Do you folks have questions for Shinzen, or would you prefer to spend the last little bit practicing? Let us know in the chat what your preference is, and we will go in that direction. And maybe for now, Shinzen, speak for a moment on that, what I had just mentioned about this ever-present present moment. And what I found is one way to tap into this pretty seemingly abstract experience of the tug of time and space sort of breaking down is just to let the present moment be the only thing that exists, really try to plug into this as the only universe, and the mind sort of starts to let go of the sort of time factor, and then it'll slip back in and come in and out. But I'm wondering what your thoughts are around that.
Well, so we talked about physics, mathematics, and philosophy, and then what our sensory experience is.
Yeah.
And so philosophically, now we're going to, for just a moment, take a philosophical perspective. Culturally, historically, at the very beginning of Western civilization, the very beginning, before there was an Aristotle, before there was a Plato, before there was a Socrates, they talk about the pre-Socratic philosophers. One of my favorite works of art, I think you and I have gotten into this, is the School of Athens.
Oh, yeah.
Have you and I ever had that discussion?
A little bit, not a ton.
That's a long Dharma talk that I give. It's now evolved into something really elaborate.
Let's get a link for that, and we'll make sure to have that in the description. Also, folks, in the description of this video, now there are a few links, I think including to some of Shinzen's material, but we'll include links. I don't know if we're going to have this. We'll probably have a playback for this, so if you're watching this in the playback, we'll have links to this talk, if we can find it, and other Shinzen materials.
So there's this famous painting called The School of Athens by Rakhel that's taken to sort of represent the pinnacle, really, of Renaissance art in some ways. And it makes Plato and Aristotle at the center, but it has very prominently the two most important pre-Socratic philosophers. Heraclitus, who said everything changes, and Parmenides, who said nothing changes. And so this, of course, is philosophy, but I'm going to claim, or I'm going to hypothesize, that both what Parmenides had to say, nothing changes, and what Heraclitus had to say. Everything changes. I believe that this is not based merely on philosophy, based on actual sensory experience that they had. However, what this means, and I believe that those sensory experiences of time and space being altered so that nothing changes and nothing doesn't change, those were meditative experiences that they probably had, probably without systematic cultivation in quite the way that we would now think about meditation, because that's what they lacked. They lacked a sense of systematic exercise. That's the great contribution of India, that you can develop these attentional skills systematically. Well, there's no evidence that at the beginning of Western civilization, the West knew about that. But by hit or miss, or who knows how, we have one person, Heraclitus, saying, well, we have the central paradox that you brought up, right? Your question is right there at the beginning of Western civilization. Now, as a meditator of many decades, if you were to ask me, as the result of the meditation, do I have access to a world of constant change, and so there never is anything because it never lasts long enough to be a thing? Do I have access to a world of change that is so constant that I could only describe it as being like spirit, insubstantial, or like fire, the way Heraclitus described it? Has my meditation given me access to that? The answer is yes. If you were to ask me, has my meditation given me access to a world where nothing changes and everything is simultaneously present? Yes. In other words, Parmenides and Heraclitus are both right from the viewpoint of contemplative practice. Is it a little weird and paradoxical? Yes, but it simply is the way it is. We have similar problems. Half of the enlightened people say that enlightenment is finding your true self. The other half say enlightenment is finding that there truly is no self. They're actually talking about the same thing, using very different language. So this kind of paradox comes up over and over again. That's how I would respond now, Janusz, to your question. I would cite the School of Athens, which is an artwork, and you're in the art field, and then look at Heraclitus, look at Parmenides.
Yeah, I was able to get the image on the screen.
Oh, great. Philosophically, they disagree. Sensorially, I'm going to claim if I could dialogue long enough with them, I'd show them that they're talking about the same thing.
Yeah, and I think that something that comes up a lot in these discussions is that when we start to get into an area of perception that's pre-linguistic, that's more fundamental than the learning structure of the brain based on language, you can get very confused, but also you can use almost any language to describe it. And that's what I think where a lot of these conflicts actually come from. And I just want to also mention, so we got some great activity here in the chat. Thank you, folks, for your input. One person is asking if you could, this is the classic thing, and I love this question. It's a question if you could explain something about Culadasa's system, but we're actually hoping to have Culadasa as a guest. So if folks are okay with that, we're going to hold off on that one, especially because we want to. I want to connect with your system there, Shinzen. And if we can circle back to that if we have time, we will. Someone else.
Sure, I just had dinner with Culadasa like two nights ago.
Oh yeah, lovely.
Yeah, we went to a cowboy steakhouse.
Oh, that's lovely.
Here in Tucson.
Oh, P.S. Shinzen, I want to start a petition to raise some money to. We have this idea of having all these like heavy contemplatives receive the Rorschach test, like a professionally done Rorschach test. Daniel.
Oh my God! Yeah, Dan the other the other Dan, Dan.
Ingram. Dan Ingram?
No, the Rorschach tests were already given to advanced meditators at Harvard.
Oh, is that true?
Dan Brown.
Siegel? Brown, Dan Brown.
No, Dan Brown
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
was
Okay,
at
well,
Harvard,
we
and
gotta
you
look that
got to
up.
look up his research. It's already been done,
That's great.
and they found very now. This is just that one study at Harvard
Yeah.
done decades ago, but I'm pretty sure it was Dan Brown, not the Dan Brown that wrote the Da Vinci Code,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
the meditator Dan Brown.
Yeah. That's great.
uh, but you know what they found?
What's that?
They found that there were basically two groups. Now, I may be not exactly correct about this, but as I remember from Dan's conversation from 20, 30 years ago when we discussed this, I think what he found was that there were the very advanced meditators, and then there was everyone else. Everyone else meaning either non-meditators or not very advanced meditators. So the very advanced meditators related to the Rorschach in a way that had never been documented
right.
in the history of Rorschach.
You told me this. Yes.
People should look up the study because my memory can be faulty. But I think it was basically that they perceived the entire sequence of Rorschach images as a story, and the story related to their experience of enlightenment.
And I think you were saying that no matter what order they were in, people perceived them as being this incredible unfolding dharmic teaching that was
That's
like,
correct.
I couldn't, like each one is, oh, this is so brilliant. And it was like, which showed that the system itself was sort of teaching itself in that way.
So
Yeah.
basically, you give someone a something sort of undifferentiated. The general public will relate one way,
Yep.
but someone that's done an extraordinary depth of practice, their wisdom function will simply process that as a manifestation of cosmic truth. That's how the wisdom function, what we call technically the prajna, 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 that wisdom function can take anything. You hand me a comic book, any comic book, and you say, Shinzen, flip through it, and then create a Dharma talk based on what was in this comic book. I can actually do that. But apparently in this study, it had happened with Rorschach.
Yeah. So Shinzen, I want to get to some of the stuff in the chat. And folks, we don't usually go this long, but I just wanted to make sure everyone knows we're going a little over. Usually it's a 25-minute meditation, some group conversation, but this is so lovely. If you need to go, of course, please do. But there's some great questions here in the chat. One question is from Chloe, which asks, do you need to experience time slowing down in order to experience as a precursor for cessation?
That's interesting. I don't know that one needs to do that, but I would say that a common experience of equanimity is that your internal clock slows down. As you drop into equanimity, it seems like you're in a kind of timeless world. And yet this dilation of time is actually sort of liberating and pleasant. You would think if time is slowing down, let's say you're in a lot of pain, physical pain, but you drop into deep equanimity and then time sort of slows down, and you're in sort of an eternal now with this pain, you would think that slowing down of time would add to the suffering, but it actually immensely relieves the suffering. So I would say in my experience, and once again, it's just my experience, the slowing down of time tends to be associated with dropping into deeper states of what I call equanimity, which in early Buddhism would be called letting go of craving and aversion.
Lovely. So it looks like I do want to get to these questions because we really appreciate everyone coming and asking questions, and we do try to get to everything. So, Shinzen, what is your thought, or do you have any thought on Culadasa's formation of attention and awareness? And I know your system very well. I know his system a little bit, and I know that that's not something that you really pulled out and designated. And I've had this fantasy that it should sort of be slid into the definition of concentration if we're going to put it anywhere in your system. But what are your thoughts on that relationship of zooming in and out in that way?
Culadasa and I have never discussed this in detail. So until we do,
Right.
everything is quite tentative. But I think you're right. It's a way of talking about how to focus your attention
Yeah.
primarily. And it's not entirely, but somewhat related to what I call a local global focus.
Right.
Remember that, how we
Yes.
do that? I think it's related to that. So what we have here is the situation that we always have, which is you have teachers that have experience. They may have had to struggle to get beyond words in order to get to that deep experience. That's the first struggle. But then they need to communicate that experience to other people. So that's the second struggle, the struggle to find the words that can convey to other people. So there's this first struggle with words, around words, is the struggle to with the addiction to words. The second struggle is once you've recovered from the addiction to words, how do you put that process into words? So one way or another, either at the beginning of the practice or at the end, you have to have this. You have to come to grips with the words. So what teachers do is they find words for things. There's two ways to relate to words. Either, and this goes to the philosophy of science as stated by, or as formulated by Karl Popper. So there's sort of the Aristotelian relationship to words, and then there might be what we might call the opposite of that. So the Aristotelian approach is there is an essence called awareness. There's an essence called attention. Now we need to find out, we need to argue and discuss until we figure out what the thing called awareness really is. And until we figure out what the thing called attention really is. We're going to hash that out until we come to the essence. That's one way to relate to words. So if Culadasa says we're going to distinguish attention from awareness, what's your first reaction? Is your first reaction, oh, well, but this other teacher talks about attention and there's this other thing about awareness. So he's got an idea about it, but this other person has this other idea about what attention is. But this other person has yet another idea. Obviously, they're disagreeing. And now we're down the primrose path of contention. That's one way to relate to words.
Right.
Now, Karl Popper advocates a different way. Sometimes it can be useful to keep track of the big picture. Sometimes it can be useful to hold something in central attention. Sometimes it can be useful to do both. I'm Shinzen Young. Let's call the first one a global focus. Let's call the next one a local focus. and let's call the combination a local global focus. So I came up with some important attributes, and then I said, we need a name for this. Let's call it X. Now we're not going to argue but let's say, and I'm not saying this is what Culadasa is saying, he and I have not had the disambiguation discussion that would make me confident. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, that Culadasa realizes what I just said. And he says, okay, let's call one of these attention and let's call the other one focus. And now we know what we're talking about. Now there's no argument because we just needed to name something. The fact he's taken focus to be the names, and the fact that I may have taken global versus local, or someone else may have taken something, and the fact that some other scientist or some other philosopher says attention means this, awareness means this, all of that doesn't now confuse us because we know exactly what we're talking about. So that isn't exactly the answer to the question, but it's a general way to go about answering the question. We can argue about the essence of what words are supposed to mean, or we can say there are important experiences that people have and we need words for them. Let's call it this, let's call it that. Mindfulness. What does mindfulness mean? Is it a translation of sati? Is it a translation of satipatthana? Is it a translation of vipassana or vipassana? Is it a translation of the Tibetan translation of sati? Is it a translation of the Tibetan translation of satipatthana? Or the Chinese? Oh, but guess what? In China, don't interrupt me. In China and in Tibet, those words would be translated the same in English, maybe, but they have very different connotations in those traditions. So I'm just saying, what does mindfulness mean? Well, there's concentration, clarity, and equanimity. These are core skills that are explicitly or implicitly talked about in all contemplative traditions, or sometimes not, but that's a failing in that tradition. We need a word for it. And we need a word that is neutral and consonant with science. Let's call it mindfulness. Karl Popper will be happy. Aristotle and his contentious crew might continue arguing.
Right. Right. And I just want to mention to folks that if someone happens to be in the chat who has a link just to include Shinzen's really excellent involved article on this exact topic, this is actually where the diagrams of the path of awakening that I used actually in my process are located, and they include the bending back of time. So if anyone can put that in the chat, that'd be really helpful.
That's the article called What is Mindfulness?
Yes. You can just look it up. What is Mindfulness Shinzen? And it'll be the first thing that pops up.
I'm going to warn you. In Japanese, there's two words for read, tadoku and midoku. Tadoku means read widely. Midoku means read and really taste. My essay, What is Mindfulness, is something to be read over and over again over a period of, let's say, 10 years.
Yeah. Absolutely. Lovely. Okay, so Shinzen, let me make sure I still have you here, right, Shinzen?
Yep, we're still on.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so we still have a number of people here. Thank you, folks who stuck around. I'm torn because we have a number of questions and a number of people
Janusz, maybe we need to do a follow-up because we're just getting going.
Exactly. So let's do that. Let's make sure to have you on again soon. What I would suggest is a lot of people did request a little bit of practice, so maybe we'll close with a little practice. But also people can stay on and chat if people have questions or want to share resources. And of course, if you want to know when we go live, right now we have already scheduled Michael Taft is hopefully coming soon. We have Dan Ingram said he's coming on. We have a slate of people that we want to come visit. Most of all, though, we practice in community. We ask a lot of questions. We dive into the deep side and see how we can integrate that into our lives. So please feel free to subscribe and join us again every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern. Why don't we do a little bit of practice to close out the formal part of this session? How does that sound?
Sounds great to me.
Great.
Once again, take a moment to stretch up and settle in. And once again, for carryover into daily life, we're going to practice with eyes open. You'll recall that I gave you a little sensitizing exercise to the tug of the sense activations. Now we're going to simplify. At any given instant, you might be pulled into an activation. It could be inner, outer, or both. That's the next moment about to arise. Let's call that next. On the other hand, the tug of the senses might go away. You might not be pulled to the next thought or the next sight or sound. There might be a disengagement. The tug to next, the tug of time, the tyranny of next, either releases or it comes online. If next arises, say next, but try to be detached. If next doesn't arise, say rest. And abide in freedom from the tyranny of next. The tyranny of next means next sucks you in, convinces you that there is a thing called self and a place called world. Okay, good. Good work, folks. Thanks for your patience. Janusz, thanks for making this all possible.
Absolutely. And thank you everyone for joining us. It's really a delight. We have been planning this for a really long time. And what we didn't expect was that it would be so community oriented and that we'd feel connected. We thought, we'd do meditation, we get some Q&A, like a class, but it feels very connected and it feels super supportive. And it's so nice to see everyone coming from all over the place and saying hello to each other. The first day that we did it, there was a major technical problem and I couldn't get online for 15 minutes. And what that meant was everyone just started talking to each other, which I think is maybe the most valuable part of this group. It's called The Joy of Being a Live Stream. And so it's great that we can have that kind of connection, even from a sort of virtual, distant place. So thank you, Shinzen, and thank you everyone here who joined. It looks like, unless we get a late super chat, the last super chat is from Ralph naming our plant for tomorrow purple. Your name will be there. We love you all. Thank you all for joining us. And we will be back here Monday with some more meditation. So thank you so much. Thank you, Ron, Chris, Savai, Lewis. Thank you so much. Jolana, thank you very much. Good to see you all. Okay, folks, and feel free to keep chatting in the chat. It'll be alive even when the live stream ends, and we look forward to seeing everyone soon. Okay, thank you again, Shinzen, and let's connect soon.
Very good. And all you folks out there that are doing this important work, thank you for who you are and what you are becoming.
Awesome. Thanks, folks. See you soon.